Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our fifth podcast, which is the second in our plastic/artificial series, continuing down the conversation of what it means to be or feel plastic/artificial in the modern world. I'm going to be your pseudo-host tonight. My name is Stefan. I'm joined by someone you're unfortunately familiar with named Mark. And today we are very fortunate to be graced by the presence of a good friend of mine and a master of the personality domain named Uri. Can you take a second to introduce yourself and give us a little bit about what you're up to?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stefan. Hi, Mark. It's really good.
Uri.
Yeah, it's really good to be here. So just a bit about me. I'm an organizational psychologist, and I study and teach personality and individual differences. I also have co-founded a startup called Deeper Signals, where we create products that help people understand themselves and their personalities better so that they can perform better in life and at work. And so this topic, when Stefan mentioned it, obviously is close to my heart and something I think about a lot. So really excited for the conversation.
Cool. Mark, do you want to give a quick summary of who you are?
I'm Mark from the last podcast. I write things, and you can find most of my writings at eternalremedy.com.
Cool. Without further ado, let's get into it. So in terms of context setting, what we try to do in these conversations is explore the topics that we dive into deeply and provide a bit more relevance and narrative to them in a way that makes them, I guess, a bit more accessible and brings the magazines and the events to life. So we wanted to add personality in particular because I think we'd be remiss if we were exploring, what it feels like to feel plastic or artificial and not focusing on what it's like for the individual and individual differences. So let's begin with asking our guests tonight, what do you think about a plastic personality? Does it exist? And if it doesn't, why not? And if it does, what would it look like to have a plastic personality? Can we begin first with Mark?
Sure. I'm no personality expert, so I'm a little bit nervous to go before Uri, but I'll give it my best shot. I think when we think about the word plastic, I think we think about something that is not real. And I think when it comes to the domain of personality, I think that what that translates to is a personality based on manipulation. So like you're not expressing, you like a plastic person doesn't necessarily express or put forth into the world what he or she is really feeling, and hence they're a little bit manipulative. And I think people do that for all sorts of reasons. The main one being not wanting to stray too far from the fold, if that makes sense. So yes, I do believe that plastic personalities exist in the way that I just defined them. And yeah, what do you think, Uri?
I mean, I agree with you that plastic personalities exist, but I don't necessarily agree with the way we're phrasing it. So plastic personalities are not a noun, right? They're a description. Personality, I would say, whenever we talk about it, is always just a description of the way someone's behaving. So if when we have terms that we all understand and agree on. If I say this person is being inauthentic or they come across as plastic, and you know what I mean, and Stefan knows what I mean, and most people do, then yeah, by definition, no one can really argue with that being a personality. Because again, personality just means Stefan is a really outgoing, excitable, passionate person. Maybe Mark is more of a withdrawn, a reserved, methodical, careful thinking person. We have all different ways we describe people, and then they kind of group together, and that's what we call personality. So does it exist in the world that we sometimes consider people to be more plastic or inauthentic, and we may describe them that way? Yeah, absolutely. If you said to me, it didn't, plastic personalities don't exist, it would just mean that there's another way of describing the people that we both know to come across as inauthentic. I think a better question maybe is there something wrong with being plastic personality, with having a less authentic way of interacting with people? Do we really expect people to be authentic? Or is there even such a thing as being completely authentic?
Interesting. So what we've introduced already early on is value judgments of personality, which I find probably particularly germane to this discussion, because what's embedded in the terms artificial and plastic, I think the connotation lends itself to say that it's less good than authenticity and realness. So I want to unpick that a bit with you both and ask you, what would you think, what are the implications of someone embodying a plastic personality or living a plastic personality? And think about your response on the individual level and the more wider societal level.
I would say, I think it's just about trust. If we're talking about a value judgment, obviously I'm not going to claim authority on the moral good or bad of authenticity. But I think the reason why it's generally accepted to assume that being more authentic and less fake or plastic is better is because we as a species are pretty hardwired to give value and appreciate trust. We can't really function without it. And so when I meet you and I work with you, or you're my friend or you're my partner, I need to know that the things that you say and do I can trust, and I can predict what you're going to do next for my own survival. And so that's why there's a lot of weight given to that concept. That's how I think about it.
Mm-hmm. Mark?
I see. So humor me if you may, Uri. So what's your definition of a plastic personality?
I think I would describe it as inauthentic, and by
Okay.
inauthentic, I would describe it as going around behaving and interacting with others in a way for which they then perceive you as keeping a lot under the covers, as not really as having more hidden than you are exposing, and that makes people describe you as being plastic, inauthentic.
Okay.
Yep.
So why do you think people would behave like that? Hello?
That's a good, yeah.
Yes.
I thought, thinking for a second. I think that's a good question. I think there's probably a whole bunch of reasons why people would behave that way. I think there's going to be personal attributions. It's just the way they are. There can be nature versus nurture questions in there, and then there could be very significant environmental reasons. We all know that work sometimes forces you to be that way, that life forces you to be that way.
Of course it does.
Do you have anything else to add to that, Mark?
Like in terms of like what are the individual and what are the social costs? Yes,
Yeah.
I do agree that it when somebody's being plastic or inauthentic, I agree that it doesn't foster trust. it makes you come across as fake, and as Uri was pointing out, it's hard to develop a relationship wherein one thrives with somebody like that. I do also think that it might harm the person. So if you're being inauthentic, or you're going against your trust and deepest feelings, I do believe that it might cause some kind of illness. Wherein I was reading about the example of some kid who wanted to pursue an artistic path, but his father wanted him to become a doctor. And the child had headaches until one day when he finally told the father, "No, I don't want to do this. I want to do, this thing, this thing that is my burning passion instead." So I do believe that, you might become sick if you're a little bit, or to a great extent, inauthentic.
I want to take this further and add a wrench to both your points of view and ask how we feel about aspirational personalities. So if I wanted to be more bold or more emotionally stable or more orderly, and I began to some degree being fake about my natural inclinations, am I not being inauthentic by doing that?
I think according to the definition of authenticity, that the working definition that seems to be coming out of this conversation, then of course you're being inauthentic. There seems to be an assumption that there's uh, there's some soul or some truth or something about who you are, and if you're not living by that secret code, then you're being inauthentic. And who are you to decide that you should be more bold if you were born and bred to not be bold?
Mm. Yeah, there's some audacity there, which I think lends itself to receiving both positive and negative appraisal. And what I'd like to also add to that is, thinking about the question of when are we actually more ourselves? Is it in this, however diluted self-concept that we try to portray to the world, or is it in our natural inclination? And is there, if there's a difference in how we perceive that, can there actually be such a thing as a plastic personality? What do you think, Mark?
I think that is an excellent question. I I, I do believe that, um, as it was pointed out earlier, that there's some degree of some element of nature, that fixes our personalities, and there's an element of nurture too that's at play. I do believe that your personality unfolds as you go throughout life, so you're a different person at different times, I imagine. And
Mhm.
I think that, at any given point, who we are is revealed when we reflect upon our actions. So, like, I don't know, you might behave one way in the situation, but you might sit down and you might reflect, and you might ask yourself if I did the best that I could in that situation, um, given what you know about yourself, and given your history and whatnot. And I suppose your personality emerges to some degree from, like, that act of reflection.
Hmm. What do you think, Uri?
Interesting. Interesting. I mean, let's remember, even though we're talking about authenticity, we don't really want people to be 100% authentic, right? But what we really want is people to be authentically inauthentic, right?
Right.
Because we want them to behave in ways that they seem authentic, but of course, don't go too far, right? And where too far is, of course, that line is different in different circles. But what does that tell you about being authentic? It really tells you that it's like every other social structure. It's a lens by which we can look at people, describe phenomena, and then give certain rules and restrictions for how we should behave. Don't be too much toward the extreme of inauthenticity or being inauthentic. Don't be too much towards the extreme of being, authentic. Telling me too much, displaying too much, being too erratic, etc. Don't you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And I think that has led me into just reflecting on, a real salient example of that in our online personalities, just the power and presence of the social parameters at play. Like you could say, we're encouraging people to speak their truth online, but you must speak your truth in a way that we can feel is palatable and is acceptable to what is asked of us in public discourse. I think, in recent examples in the news, just all the cases of people being canceled culture, when you say something that is not socially acceptable online. I think that's super interesting. But the irony is heavy here because authenticity, I guess, basically just becomes another way of social control when you must be authentic in a certain way. So the individual finds themselves in this weird conundrum of being teased by the idea of being their true selves, but still having to fit that in the mold within which a true self should be. So let's take a moment to reflect on online personalities. Do you guys think that we are closer to our true self through the virtual world and through the protection of the screen, or are we moving further from ourselves?
I think like most things in when it comes to personality, the way we behave tends to eventually leak out in every context or in every frame or in every period of our life, because there are obviously patterns that emerge and that repeat themselves, right? People don't change that mantra that you hear people say all the time, right? It's true. You change a bit, but generally people don't change. And so, yes, of course, you can moderate the way you behave and are perceived by others in work, and you can do that at home to an extent. And similarly, now we have a new one called online, and we can do that online. But I don't think that you can moderate it completely, or given it any significant amount of time that you expose yourself to any of those contexts, who you are will eventually come out. But, however, keep in mind, who you are might be someone who others describe as plastic. And there's nothing wrong with that, and that might come out online and at work as well.
Any thoughts, Mark?
What would I say? I think that, yeah, the whole gamut, of your behavior, like whether it's online or offline, is, part of your personality.
Right.
So no, I don't think I don't think you're more inauthentic in real life. I think you might be a little bit more measured because the circumstances are different, and the punishment, the consequences that you might face are going to be more immediate offline. But I think the whole system, or that you're operating on, is it's pretty much you. It's pretty much a part of yourself. Yeah. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
Gotcha. So this conversation is way more agreeable than it should be. So as we turn the corner to close things, I want to ask you, so Uri, you brought up earlier on that the being a plastic, the reason why we may feel negatively towards someone who's being a plastic person is because there's a negation of trust there, or a breach of trust there. But what do you think it says about us, the people who are sending that judgment out into the world, such as calling someone plastic or artificial? What is it saying about us? What feeling might we be trying to avoid by labeling someone plastic?
I think it's just like every other label and every other judgment that we make about other people. It has elements of personal attribution, where it's more likely that this is who they are, or it could be environmental factors force them to be this way, right? But we're too quick as a species to personally attribute when people do things that we don't like, and so I think it's wrong. Essentially, I don't think we should be labeling people as plastic. If we do, I'm sorry, I take that back. I don't mean we shouldn't. We're all welcome to describe people as we perceive them, but I don't think it's right to put a value judgment on being plastic. And I think, and again, I think we all partake in that pattern of behavior because no one is really authentic. I think what we're getting at, if I can just go on a limb, because it might be a bit of a tangent, right? But I think what we're getting at when we talk about these things is the inner feeling that we all have that there are things that we maybe have an affinity to do, there are careers or hobbies that we enjoy, and we don't always get to pursue those things. And when we don't, we feel like we're not living our true selves. I don't want to come across as saying that those things aren't true. I think that we all internally feel that, and we have a right to feel that, and hopefully we all get to eventually run after those dreams. But that it's not necessarily related to the way that we are perceived by others as either being authentic or not authentic or being plastic. It may be that my passion or the thing that I feel I'm best at is becoming the CEO of Goldman Sachs. That's something that I've always wanted to do. And in order to do that, I have to live 50 years of my life being quote unquote plastic, because that is the state of working at Goldman Sachs. So am I not being true to myself by being plastic in that scenario? What would you say?
Before I give you a chance to chime in, Mark, what I really like about this conversation or this line of thinking as it stands right now is that it sparked in me just a general reflection on the fact that we are so we're clinging so hard to this concept of being a self that's either true or not true, that we, as you say, need to project or attribute others as being true or not true. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is we find it so hard to exist without having been defined and to move forward through that definition. Like, I need to be the employee at Goldman Sachs for me to feel like I can show up and be the employee at Goldman Sachs. I need to feel like I am a mother for me to be true of being a mother, instead of just existing prior to label. So like existing mm-hmm. as function instead of form. And I think that's so interesting because, to me, going back to the question of what we might be running away from is this constant like fleeting battle of like trying to cling on to something and also untie ourselves from it. So I think that's all interesting. Do you have anything to add, Mark?
I was going to bring the conversation back to goals in general. So you mentioned that if you wanted to become the CEO of Goldman Sachs, you might have to pursue a different. You might not go straight from college to become the CEO of Goldman Sachs. You might have to work 60 years as a truck driver or something like that in order to achieve that dream. And I would say no, in that regard, you're not being plastic, because you're moving towards your goal. You're moving towards what like something that is that could be considered. Yeah. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mark. What happens if to become the CEO of Goldman Sachs, I need to be a really uh, inauthentic, plastic feeling business executive, finance executive, who, if you met on the street after 5 minutes, you probably would be like, "Oh my gosh, like just can't get through to this guy." It's like every question. Politics might be a better example of Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
My point is, there are a lot of fields where you need to be plastic in order to succeed in them.
Yes, I would agree. Politics is definitely like that. But does
You
it have to be like
once an
that?
authentic politician, and or
Does it
maybe
have to
not.
be like that?
Mm.
Can we close on one heavy question? And I want you guys to take your time and deliberate on your points of view on this, and make it as personal as you can. But what do you think you would become if you let go of the idea of having a personality? Mark, you want to start?
What do I think I would become if I let go of the idea of having a personality?
So
Like,
taking a bit of a meta stance beyond plastic, artificial, or authentic and true, if you just let go of a personality in general, this binding agent that you attribute your self-concept.
So if you let go of the idea that you have to be a certain way, that you have to go through the world behaving a certain way, and what would I become? Is that the question, or am I misinterpreting it?
I think it's close. I wouldn't put have to in it, because it could be something that you willingly decide. Like you willingly decide to be more agreeable, or willingly decide to be more extroverted, whatever it is. But more so, follow this line of being.
Like consistency. Like, do you mean say like if you can be completely inconsistent?
Yeah, if you could try to be inconsistent, yeah.
I see. What would I become? I don't know. I
I
don't
think,
know.
I
Yeah,
think,
go ahead.
Stefan, I have to say that even if you are completely inconsistent, you're then consistently inconsistent. As you can't really escape being described as something. And I do understand what you're trying to ask, but I'd say, if you can, if your personality, or another way of saying it might be, if the way that you perceive yourself is constraining you and not allowing you to behave in other ways because you have a self-image, which is probably based on previous patterns of behavior, and that self-image is now forcing future behaviors and not allowing you to diverge from them, what would you become if you can just let go of those constraints? Is that true? Did I capture that?
Yeah, I think so. I think what I'm trying to ask you guys implicitly is, can we feel more free than having found a personality? Is there a state of being that's more free than that? Because we always, in more ways than one, wrestle with the idea of freedom, even in this line of conversation around plastic and artificial. It's how free can the human being actually be?
Yeah, that's it's an interesting question. I actually don't know. I don't know what I would be like. Let's say that I gave up on the idea that I should be what I now consider Mark Hutchinson, a writer, I don't know, soccer player, something like that. A nice person, or whatever it is that I consider myself to be currently. What would I become if I had to do without those value judgments? If I'm not interpreting the question incorrectly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know because the thing is, my personality, I believe, is is a performance, you know, and I get better at it the more the more I practice being this person who I think I am, you know.
Hmm.
So if I
Yeah.
had to give up that person, I don't know what I would
But
become. I don't know.
I think the key here to consider, and maybe also for your listeners to consider, is just that is something which is possible. You know, exactly what you become. I think maybe the reason, Mark, if I can be a bit presumptuous and say the reason why it's so hard to think about what you become is because all of a sudden there's infinite opportunity.
Yeah.
Whereas what we are now to a large extent is made for us. Lots of things happen. It's a domino effect, and we end up very determined in a very deterministic view. We end up here, right? Of course, we feel like we made some decisions, and we did make some decisions, but for the large, for a large part, we end up here. But when you just say, "Hey, let's say I press pause, and now I can," like you said, I can change all of my values. I can become something completely different. Become selfish, and I can become, I don't know. Just take politics for example. I'm a good Williamsburg hipster liberal Democrat, and I'm a startup founder, right? But I could tomorrow just make a few changes to my life and become a conservative Republican and go get a job, a full-time corporate job, right? I could. The idea is that it's something that we can do. I think that's a really powerful. I find anyway that that's something which is really enabling for people to realize, because there are many points in life that we probably can or do have flexibility or leeway to make more changes than we give ourselves credit to, to be able to do.
Hmm. I think you hit the nail on the head for me, Uri. What I was hoping to introduce, however covertly, was the case for being plastic. Actually, just imagine the
Mhm.
the freedom that allows for you to choose
Mm-hmm.
to be something that you are not. I think it's a beautiful thing, and it's an important reminder for us as we get fixated and hung up on this story that we tell ourselves, this narrative that we tell ourselves of who we are, that even the idea of it can be entertained within our cognitive space. It's a beautiful thing. But having said that, I don't think we even know what that would look like or how to do it, even though we desire and yearn from it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, think about how many times you feel throughout the day that you wish you could feel another way, or that you could act another way, or that you could, be more than what you are. But if you were to actually try and go down that avenue, it's a bit daunting. It's almost scary to have that kind of liberation.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it wouldn't mess with your I think it would mess with your goals in life, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Mm-hmm.
It requires
Because
you to flex different muscles.
yeah, it could, but let's say that you gave up on the idea of personality across the board. Like you're essentially you're
Yeah.
essentially a valueless entity, you know. And I think this might be what Nietzsche was preaching for, or was asking for, calling for, you know. An entity capable of creating its own values or
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Yeah.
Like it would be hard to know where to go in life, which direction, the direction in which you should move would not be
Would be much less predictable and much less clear for what to do next. And
yes, and
let's
I
be
think
honest, you don't have all the freedom. You can't literally live Nietzsche, because some values you couldn't get yourself to give up.
yes, I think that was Young's point too, that some of the values are built in, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
I do actually agree with them that some of the values are built in. But
Let's let's close on this note just for the
okay.
sake of time. But I think that's something definitely to package and harness and pocket within ourselves, and to ask, our listeners to hold for themselves as well. Just, you know, actually imagining what it would actually be like to explore a whole different value set that we've built on our own, and one that isn't tied to a grander idea such as personality or social identification or political affiliation. And just leaning into that feeling and asking us why we feel that way. I think that to me is something I've been asking myself, and this conversation has helped spark as well. But just why can't things be otherwise? Uri, thank you so much for joining us in this ridiculous tangled web of conversation. I hope you got something out of it. I hope our listeners got something out of it, and I enjoyed your company.
Thank you for having me.
We have a magazine coming out very soon. I can't wait to share it with you guys. Please stay tuned to our socials, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for updates. And if you're on our mailing list, you're going to get a special update very imminently. Uri, is there anything you'd like to plug? What's going on in your life?
Well, Deeper Signals is moving along, so no need to plug, but it is quite a cool startup that we're working on, which is new, interesting, novel ways of understanding your own personality and the core of your personality, so that with it you can do all the different things that we were just talking about.
Cool.
Oh, by the way, Uri, what's your website?
It's deepersignals.com.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you both. Any lasting thoughts, reflections that you want to push out into the universe?
Oh yeah, for the listeners, don't do what Stefan just argued for. It will drive you crazy.
I would pitch for the middle of the road. So you don't need to throw everything out, but you should probably consider that there are alternatives, or there can be some tweaking and adjusting to what you might consider to be your path that can be liberating.
Indeed.
Very sensible answer at that. All right. Yeah. Until next time, thank you guys for listening in. We'll hear from you soon.
Nice.
Y'all.